I really love the stories that I just heard, and I knew all of those stories already, and I loved hearing them again. And it just reminds me that every person in the world is just a precious, unique soul that brings something into the world that only they can bring. It's so easy for us to think, well, I'm just one person, and there's 6 billion people in the world, and there are forces in control of things, and what can I do? We can do a lot, but we're all completely precious, and we're all born to do something great, I think. And I was reminded of that by hearing your stories, so thank you for sharing those again. This morning I gave a few highlights of history of the university, and I just want to take a few minutes to... Do we need all these... Are we taking this, or...?
Yes.
Okay. All right. It's hard to see you. I wanted to take a few minutes to give maybe a little bit longer sweep of history and perhaps a little bit deeper, and start with really the seed of the founding of Maharishi University of Management, and how, as Josh said, there are branches and aspects of that all over the world now. And that seed really begins probably 70 years ago or so. And I'll just tell you this very briefly, and you'll hear this recounted in greater detail. Maharishi, our founder, was born in India, obviously, and he went to college and got a degree in physics. And at the same time that he was in college, he was also, like all of us, a spiritual seeker. And he was looking for somebody who could teach him a technique that would lead him to enlightenment. And he searched and searched. And finally he found somebody who he felt could do that. And that person, a few years later, turned out to become, in India the position is called Shankaracharya of Jyotirmat, which is the preeminent seat of spiritual, of Vedic knowledge in India. And that person's name was Brahmananda Saraswati, who to this day is revered as really the embodiment of Vedic wisdom, of enlightenment, of all possibilities in life, of fullness of life, of totality. And so Maharishi was his student for about 13 years. And then when Brahmananda Saraswati, who Maharishi refers to as Guru Dev, which means great teacher, when he passed away in 1953, then Maharishi went into the Himalayas for a life of silence for 2 years. And there was some little seed thought inside that motivated him to come out. He wanted to go to the south of India and visit a holy spot there. And he came out and he was asked if he speaks, in other words, if he gives lectures. And he said no, he doesn't. Nevertheless, the person who asked him went ahead and scheduled 7 lectures for him. And he wanted to honor the commitment that that person has made. He started lecturing. And he basically never stopped. That was in 1955. And he taught transcendental meditation. He didn't want to leave the south of India without leaving what he called the blessings of the Himalayas with the people there, because he saw enormous suffering in the world. And he knew from his own experience that actually life is bliss. Life is meant to be enjoyed. The purpose of life, as he said, is the expansion of happiness. And he looked around and saw that that wasn't the actual reality. So he had a technique that he had learned from his teacher, Guru Dev, and he wanted to share that. And once he started, he just never stopped for 57 years. He spent 4 years in India, and then he hatched the idea, he did the math, and he realized that at this rate, at the rate that he was teaching people, although he was teaching them by the thousands, it would take him about 200 years to reach the whole world. So he decided he had to come to the United States because he felt that the US was the most creative country in the world. Being the most creative country in the world, he thought, if there's something good, something that will promote life, promote goodness in the world, people in the United States would pick it up. So he came to the US, and then he subsequently traveled around the world, and over the next decade he went around the world 10 times. And he was teaching transcendental meditation to thousands and tens of thousands of people everywhere. After a few years of this, he realized that the demand was so great that he had to, what he called, multiply himself. So he taught other people how to teach transcendental meditation, first by the hundreds and then by the thousands. And as he went around the world and as thousands of people became trained as teachers, they established teaching centers all over the world, and there are teaching centers in most major cities around the world. But Maharishi really just never stopped, and those who worked near him said that he literally worked around the clock. He never took vacations. He had 2 sets of staff. those who could handle the daytime shift and the night shift. During the night, he would be on the phone with people in parts of the world where it was daytime. There was one story that I'll never forget about how he was meeting with leaders, and they met late into the night, and finally he asked, what time is it? And somebody said, well, actually, Maharishi, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. And as full of energy as ever, he said, well, should we stop or should we begin? And everybody went off to sleep, and he just kept on going. When he looked at the Vedic tradition, he saw not only the source of a powerful meditation technique that would unfold the full potential that everybody has but doesn't use, but there was more than that. And the more he looked into it, the more he realized that there was much more to offer. And so in the last decades of his life, he brought out body of knowledge after body of knowledge related, for example, to healthcare, or to architecture, or to agriculture, or to defense. And working with the Vedic experts who retained this knowledge, he brought this out in what he considered to be its purest form, its most complete form, and made it available to the world. His whole purpose in life was just to relieve the suffering in the world and raise two things: the individual to the highest state of consciousness, the expression of their full potential, enlightenment, and to create peace on the world. Those were his twin goals right from the start. And all along, right from the start, he kept insisting that it was possible to create an ideal quality of life in the world. Just ideal. He wasn't shy about saying what was possible. He said, an age of enlightenment. Heaven on earth was the expression he was using right in the beginning. And you can hardly imagine a phrase that draws a more stark contrast with the reality of the world as it appears in the news than the phrase heaven on earth. But that was his mission. And he felt that the key to this was not so much to work on the political level or on some outward level, but it was based on an inner transformation, a transformation of consciousness, individual by individual, country by country, school by school, whoever would take it up. He was just giving out what really had been a body of knowledge that had just been preserved by a narrow line, narrow band of masters of the Vedic tradition. Now he was just giving it out all over the world. And when he talks about ideal quality of life, you look around, and is the quality of life ideal now? And let's just hold as the possibility, as a thought, that we might be able to create an ideal world. Maybe we think it's impossible, maybe you're skeptical, fine. But if it were possible, what would have to change? Well, everything would have to change, wouldn't it? Every sphere of life would have to change. And let's just go through them. You know, how many of you are happy, for example, with health and healthcare now? Is it working pretty well, do you think, for the world? No, really, the whole healthcare system is broken, and beyond that, the health, of people, at least in the West, is declining. 40% of Americans have a chronic disease. Modern medicine is the fourth leading cause of death. Modern medicine itself is the fourth leading cause of death in the country. Something is deeply broken. How about education? Is that working? There are good schools, and there are very dedicated teachers. I feel that teaching is one of the most selfless, service-oriented professions that there is. But on the whole, education really is not working. It's a world of teacher burnout, of school burnout, of dead-end schools, of government intervention that isn't working, of finances drying up, just not working. What would you think about food and agriculture? Is that really on a good track today? People have good diets, they're healthy, everybody's trim and fit. No, this health, it's ruled by big companies. It just isn't working. It's really broken there too. How about the military? Is that doing a good job in keeping the world safe? And no, it's broken. It's completely broken. Everywhere you look, things are just not working. And so if we were to imagine, just again as a hypothesis, that there could be an ideal world, we'd have to imagine that it's not just a matter of tweaking around the edges, everything has to be redone. And that was Maharishi's mission. And for each body of knowledge that he brought out from the Vedic tradition, he had an application for it, to these problems in the world. Obviously, in the area of education, consciousness-based education is that solution. And in that field of education, it doesn't mean that schools have to change their missions or their core values or their faculty. They can continue being military schools or faith-based schools or whatever they are. They just have to add development of consciousness from within. In the area of health and healthcare, what is it that's fundamentally broken there? There's just not a way to create health from within by reducing stress and integrating brain physiology. So the core of what Maharishi would call consciousness-based healthcare was a system for reducing stress, and so the TM technique is the core of that. But he also brought forth from the Vedic tradition Maharishi Ayurvedic medicine, also called consciousness-based healthcare, and so on through area after area. Food. There's a whole approach in the Vedic tradition for organic agriculture that goes even beyond organic agriculture. That it takes advantage of Vedic technologies to ensure that the plant that you harvest and eat has the maximum intelligence that contributes the most to your health and the most to developing higher states of consciousness. And on it goes. Military, similarly, applications for every area of life. And I'm mentioning this because for each application that he brought out, there were people who said, I want to be involved in that. Tens of thousands of people who trained as transcendental meditation teachers and who run TM teaching centers around the world, or educators who are involved in these hundreds of David Lynch schools around the world, or architects and designers who wanted to be involved in Vedic architecture and design, in the area of food and agriculture, people who wanted to specialize in that. At Maharishi's inspiration, one of our own faculty, years ago, Dr. John Fagan, Maharishi warned strenuously against the dangers of genetically modified food. And he this is like so terrible that we would manipulate the fundamental intelligence of nature. And so one of our faculty members, John Fagan, who is a molecular biologist, used to work for the NIH, realized that there was a way to test for genetically engineered food in the grains or whatever. And so he has a company right at Maharishi's inspiration, started a company right here in Fairfield called Genetic ID, which is now the world's largest firm for verifying that food is actually free of genetic modification, to guarantee, to assure the organic nature of it. So all of this, what Maharishi did over the 57 years that he taught was create organization after organization, schools, universities, colleges, in agriculture, in healthcare, in defense. There are people all over doing all of these different things. And all united by this goal that we're bringing to light this ancient knowledge and we can use it to create a better world. Very diverse people all over the world. Now, all of this put together, all of these independent organizations sometimes go by the thumbnail word, the movement. Now, what does that mean? I just want to take a minute and explain that. It's just a handy term that's used to describe all of these different enterprises and activities and initiatives going on all over the world. And the term originally derived from the very first organization that Maharishi founded in 1957 called the Spiritual Regeneration Movement, which he founded to spiritually regenerate the world. Not spiritual in a religious sense, but spiritual in the sense of the inner content of life, which is our own pure consciousness, our own unbounded self. And so sometimes when students come and they hear this term, the movement, they say, well, wait a minute, what's up with the movement? I thought I was coming to a college. Am I joining a movement? Do I have to join a movement? Well, the answer is no. We're a college. It's accredited by the Higher Learning Commission. Our business programs have their separate accreditation by the International Association of Business Schools. So it's a college like any other. And there's no movement that one joins. In fact, the reality is there's nobody in the world who has a business card that says Transcendental Meditation Movement on it. They're all working, for these independent areas that I was describing. So it's just a handy term to describe all of that. Unfortunately, sometimes the word movement these days has a bit of a negative connotation, and I'm not sure why. For example, has anybody heard the term environmental movement? Sure. Would anybody consider themselves to be part of the environmental movement? I know I would. I don't belong to any organization. I subscribe to the Sierra Club magazine and, Nature Conservancy magazine, but I don't belong to an organization. But I consider myself absolutely passionate member of whatever hundreds of, thousands, millions of people around the world who care about our planet and want to do something to reverse the terrible direction that it's going. So I'm an avid recycler, and I'm completely intense about minimizing my carbon footprint, and I've signed any number of petitions, for this or that protection for endangered species. So that's the environmental movement. There's the women's rights movement. I don't belong to any organization that formally, is involved in that, but I consider myself to be very sympathetic toward that. I think it's offensive that women would be paid less than men for doing the same work, and should not be discriminated against. And similarly, there are all sorts of areas of life that there are hundreds of organizations involved in them, and they're given the umbrella name a movement. And whether you belong to those organizations or not, you might still feel sympathetic with them, as I do in the examples that I just gave. So I just wanted at the beginning of the year, as you hear this term, this is really what it means. Let me take it to just a deeper level, however. When Maharishi would think of the word movement, he was thinking not just of organizations and people that do things. He was really thinking of a movement in history, a movement out of an age when people lacked the knowledge of their self. They were disconnected from the self, lacked the technique for transcending. And the result of that disconnection is all of the broken things that we see in the world around us. And he felt that as more and more people reconnected with the self, were able to live more and more in accord with natural law, things would spontaneously get better, eventually moving towards heaven on earth. So that was the kind of movement that he saw, a grand sweep of history, a grand movement forward out of an age of, let's call it darkness or ignorance of that inner treasury of life, and towards this greater knowledge. So that's really the largest sense of the movement that he had in mind. So in that sense, is MUM part of a movement? Absolutely. And I think from Maharishi's perspective, anybody who learned to transcend, anybody who learned to dive within and reconnect with that, whether they ever came back to the TM Center or not, they were part of a movement, because by transcending, they were facilitating, they were promoting not only their own enlightenment, but spontaneously this change in the world that Maharishi felt was inevitable for us. So I just wanted to mention this, and so we're a university, we're, it's fair to say that we are part of a movement in the way that I've described it. Just, we have sister institutions and organizations around the world with shared goals and values. We want to transform the world, but we're completely independent, legally, financially, from any other organization. So anyway, this is what the movement is, and I wanted to tell everybody. And if any questions come up about this or anything else, really, there's a lot of discussion. You'll find a lot of things on the internet and Facebook, a lot of different comments. But feel free to speak to any of the faculty about any questions that you might have, anything that comes up that differs from what you're hearing. We would like to resolve any question. And I will stop talking. I've gone over my deadline. You have a lot of great entertainment coming up. So once again, great to see you all here this evening. And thank you for being here.